Welcome back to How to Tickle Yourself. I'm your host, Duff McDonald, along with my co-host, Joey of Rockledge.
Hello.
Our guest this week is a man of multiple dimensions. First off, Ron Brent is a friend of ours. He lives just down the road in Woodstock. But let's back up about 50 years. In the 1970s, Ron was living in California, surfing, doing yoga, and meditating, otherwise known as living the dream. The next thing he knew, he was in Ganeshpuri, India, where for 12 years, from 1982 to 1994, he managed one of the country's largest yoga and meditation training facilities. During that time, he helped establish the PRASAD project, a rural development program bringing literacy, safe drinking water, economic development, and eye camps for cataract surgery to villagers living in the vicinity of Ganeshpuri. After returning to the U.S., he spent another 9 years on the global board of directors of PRASAD, and he's currently on the board of directors for PRASAD's Children's Dental Health Program. But that's not all. Ron was co-founder of Asia Arts and Culture, a former company dedicated to bridging the cultural divide between China and the West. The publishing arm of Asia Arts and Culture, Wapner and Brent Books, published Laozi's Tao Te Ching, published or translated by Yang Peng, a visiting scholar from Harvard, and Ron served as Yang Peng's editor. He's produced documentary films shot in India, Nepal, Tibet, Turkey, and Egypt. And among his current projects is the development of the Shaolin Zen Center of New York, a retreat site for the teaching of Shaolin culture, meditation, and Kung Fu, as well as the production of a documentary film on the development and spread of Chan Buddhism. Finally, we are readers and writers here at How to Tickle Yourself, and Ron Brent did something that puts him in our Hall of Fame. He recently lent me a book that is the latest, best book I've ever read. It's called The Book of Strangers by Ian Dallas. Anyone who gives me good books earns a place in my good books. So thanks, Ron, for that, and thanks for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, Steph.
At the present moment, traveling town to town, the mystery of the motion, right here, right now, right here, right now, whoa, right here, right now.
So, where to start, Joey?
I get impressed. I get impressed when I hear Red, because I don't think about those things.
It's funny that you are not the first to say that. It turns out that reading people's bio back to them online makes most people feel pretty good.
So, Ron, I've been reading your blog, which I love, and so spiritual awakening is a big theme on How to Tickle Yourself. And in the blog, you say that an awakening can be very gentle and it can be just sort of seamlessly integrated into your life, which is that's been my experience. Or it can be of a more dynamic nature and can shake things up quite a bit, which was more Duff's experience and also yours. And I was wondering if you could just tell our listeners a little about your spiritual awakening and how your life changed as a result of it.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Well, at the time I was going to school in Santa Monica City College, photography major. And actually the transition from surfer went up into West Hollywood and Beverly Hills and clubs every night. So that was kind of my lifestyle at that point, that was actually the late 60s. That was in 67. And there was a a young guy in my photography class that had just moved out from New York to California, and he gave me the book Damien, and said I really should read this book, and I assured him I would, but I had no intention of doing it. So, because I wasn't a book reader. It wasn't part of my thing. And so the book in the back of my car, went home. I lived up in Beverly Glen Canyon, a really nice area of LA up above Sunset Strip. And one night, a couple of weeks later, my roommate had gone up to San Francisco. So I was alone in this big house and feeling kind of weird, and something was off, and I couldn't pinpoint it. Just something wouldn't let me go out that night. I would normally do. So I'm sitting at home, sitting on my bed, trying to figure out what's happening, and the book comes into my mind. So I scampered downstairs, dug it out from under the clutter in the back of my car, and took it upstairs and sat on my bed and started reading it. And first I started looking at the cover, and it was very, very eerie, very like sort of these figures of ambiguous gender. And so I picked up the book, I started reading it, and Hesse was describing Damien. And when he described him, I started getting this like sense of like identity, but in a weird kind of a way. And so I kept on reading, and as other characters came in, I started identifying with them. And this one in particular, who was going through a lot of issues, was having a lot of difficulty. And Damien was kind of his savior, the new boy in town that just moved into class. These are youth. And so I really got into the story in such a way that I never had before, being not a reader. It sucked me in. And I was just feeling like everything was like heightening. Something was happening to me. And I wasn't on anything. I should emphasize. And I had been previously. I mean,
it was the 60s.
It was the 60s. Exactly. And so I felt like something was coming on, like a psychedelic experience. So I got up off the bed and I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror really close. And I could feel this thing coming on, and my senses were heightening. So I could see like the pores in my face, things you normally don't look at when you look at yourself in the mirror. And I got really scared because normally I would go in the bathroom if I had taken something, and I would look myself in the eye in the mirror, and I'd just have a conversation. You know, you just took something. This is going to happen. You know, it's going to be weird for a couple hours. And then, you know, everything will be fine again. You know, that was kind of the pep talk if I was having any kind of a previous experience on something. So, so I went back to the bed and I started reading more. And as I started reading, all these visuals started coming up in my mind, but very intense and very real, and with a lot of emotional impact. And they were fearful images, erotic images. It was just like a lot of shit was getting stirred up, and I was freaking out. It's like this wasn't anything that I signed up for. And it built a crescendo in my mind, like where I was like a panic attack coming on, where I would want to scream. And at the height of that, everything stopped. Just stopped. And I get emotional thinking about it, because and as I say in my blog, I try not to talk about it, because the more words I use, the less it feels, you know. So I'm going to leave it at that and just say that everything stopped. And when everything stops, I'll let your imagination try to figure out what that might look like.
All right. And then everything changed in your life from that point forward.
Everything. I mean, my lifestyle was almost, I'm going to school during the day, but I'm not a serious student. My life is about getting laid, like every young guy.
A valid pursuit. Yeah.
I should say every young guy of that era.
Also other eras.
And other eras, yes. I didn't want to unpack that too much. Unless that's where you want to go, but but I'll get back to the story. So anyway, I mean, we went to all the clubs, like the whiskey and all the clubs of the day. I dated a lot of Playboy bunnies and went with some of the centerfolds. I mean, that's kind of the lifestyle that I had in my early 20s. And could be worse. Yeah.
I have a question though. Were you content? Yeah. Were you content, or were you still sort of looking? Or were you like, no, this is great, I'm good?
When you start, I think that depends on your character, but I think when you start like smoking weed, I use it as an example, it starts changing your perception, because that's what starts, kind of the takeaway in my mind. The takeaway is your perception starts changing, and that usually starts off, I think, around political ideas and social and cultural ideas, and that kind of bleeds into spiritual matters. So was I a seeker? No, I wasn't a seeker, but I was kind of in that element, where there's quite a bit of intellectual curiosity and exploration, I would say, but not a spiritual seeker by any stretch.
So after your awakening, so you were a student in Playboy, and then what happened in your life after that?
Well, it was trying to reconcile what to do, how to be. The way awakening works in 99 and 9/10% going out is that it opens a big door for you and begins a process. And sometimes, as you alluded to, sometimes it's not a big door. Sometimes it's a very small door that gradually opens over time, according to your DNA, and I use DNA in its most subtlest form, or
right,
the concept of it. So that's all individual. But for me, I was going in and out of different awarenesses, actually insights, which is what the way awareness manifests, is in insight. Mm-hmm. So then a day or two goes by, and this Mark, a friend of ours who went to school with the guys in my sort of social group, but didn't hang out with us. What he did was he sold us weed. And Mark was just a really simple guy, wore jeans and a white t-shirt and sandals, and had kind of not very long hair, but kind of like John Lennon specs kind of. And he just always had a smile on his face, and everybody liked him, and we got a really good product for him for a really good price. And he was always a good guy to have around. So he came by, and connection. And so we started talking, and he had taken acid like so many times, like he had taken, probably hundreds of trips. And, but he was very very mellow, very smooth, no craziness about him. And I think that's the thing with psychedelics is it's such an individual situation. But Mark was just really cool, so we started talking and really got on the same page together. And we decided that we aren't able to stay in that state is because the things in our environment bring us down. So we figured we should go like to the desert or to the mountains somewhere. So we got jobs at Sequoia National Park, like cleaning cabins and breaking beds down and stuff like that. And it was very cool. I mean, it was a roller coaster for me. I say it was cool. There were times when I'd walk in the meadow and I'd be like so intoxicated by the spring happening, like experiencing that. And then, 8 hours later, doubts come in. And so I was really going on a roller coaster. Meanwhile, Mark gets his, this is 1967. Mark gets his draft notice. So he goes down to LA to go to the draft board and go in, big tab of acid, and tells them very calmly, he's sorry, but he can't go in. I don't know what other words he used, but basically it was his attitude and his certitude, his conviction that he wasn't going in, and he got a deferment.
Wow.
So he goes to a party in Beverly Hills, comes up to Sequoia, and he meets somebody there, Scientology. And so he's still a little high and he's listening to it, and morning he forgot exactly what it was, but when he gets up to me, he says he found out about this thing where you can achieve that awareness, that liberation state without going through any kind of discipline or anything. It's just like a really simple system this guy Ron Hubbard developed, So he said, I'm going to go down and try it. So I said, what the fuck? I'll go down. I'm not staying up here by myself, and I need to try something. So but that might be another whole episode.
Right.
So maybe we'll leave it there and let people wonder what that's about.
Wow. So you started into your spiritual life, like that was the beginning for you.
Well, what happened was that was the beginning for me. Scientology put it to sleep.
Wow. Okay.
Scientology put it completely to sleep, and then there was in 19 because it sucks you into its culture and its mission, and so you don't have time to contemplate. You don't have the opportunity to contemplate where you're really at and what brought you there in the first place. So anyway, I get there. Ron Hubbard comes out with a new training, and it's a new Dianetics training, a revamp of his old Dianetics. And so there's a lot of excitement, and there's 100 people that are invited from all over. And I happen to be one of those people. And I'm taking this class, and in their class, they have a really good system of education where they give you a theory one, and then number two is a practical. So what you do is you go over a certain theory, and then you take a little kit that demonstrates, and the kit has erasers and leaves and stones and paper clips, and you have a partner at your table. There's like a card table, and there's like 50 of them in rows. So you've got on either side of you, there's an aisle, and then there's another row of card tables, and you have two people at each card table, and one is doing the theory. And then when he finishes the theory, he has to take little objects out of this box and demonstrate without talking to show that he understands the theory. And so at the end of the day, it's a 12-hour day with fluorescent lights glaring, and it's that kind of a room, with I believe windowless. But at the end of the evening, everybody's cleaning up, and somebody had dropped from their demonstration kit a dry twig with a leaf on it, and he was on the table sitting to my one of my sides, and he holds up the leaf and addresses to everybody, "Who does this belong to?" And the moment he said that, and I looked at it, I had a Satori experience, and I became one with that thing, and I must have been beaming, because he looked at me and he said, "What are you, some kind of philosopher?" And as I gazed around the room, I realized I would have got the same answer. So I walked out at the end of that evening, in a very short time, and never came back. So, and then I went on my search, and that stalled, just not knowing what to do. And then I heard I was sitting home one night. This was early 1970. And I'm sitting home, I'm sitting on the floor. I've got my FM stereo set there, and I'm turning the dial, in boredom, trying to find something to connect to. In those days, there was great FM programs, a variety of them. And this one, I happened to turn on this one station, and I heard a voice that was so compelling that I took my hand off the dial and I just sat back and listened. And it was Swami Satchidananda. And he was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, "Well, isn't yoga difficult?" And he said, "Not when you know the greatness of the goal." And he said that with such calm conviction that just everything inside of me said, yeah, And I took one yoga class maybe 3 years earlier in the in the back office of a New Age newspaper on Fairfax Avenue, by this East European dude named Yorosha. I remember it vividly. I don't remember any of the yoga, but I remember this guy because he was really a very striking and kind of mystical kind of a personality. But anyway, I didn't really know anything about yoga. So I made note that he was going to be talking soon at the Wilshire Abel Theater. Soon meant in a couple of days. So I saw a poster with his picture on it in a health food store that day or the next day. So I knew what the guy looked like, what the Swami looked like. And then I was visiting my family in Culver City, where I grew up. And I'm coming home in the evening, and this is like on January 8th, January 9th. Some things I have very good memory for. On January 9th was Swami Satchidananda was going to be speaking. And so I'm driving north on Robertson to Melrose to turn right to go to my home. I was living in West Hollywood. And as I'm pulling up to the intersection, Yogi Bhajan had an ashram there on the corner of Melrose and Robertson. And Swami Satchidananda was his guest that day. And just ironically, as I pulled up, they were coming out of the building, Swami Satchidananda and Yogi Bhajan, with like 100 young people all dressed in white with like shit-eating grins on their face, And so I pulled over and I went there, and I got corralled into studying with Yogi Bhajan. So I never made it to Swami Satchidananda. I did meet him and several times, but it turned out that Yogi Bhajan became my yoga teacher, and that's really was my kind of forte into yoga anyway.
So another a thing that I read in your blog that I loved, you were talking about sort of the awareness and power within us that we really are. And you said, when this power becomes a human being, it conceals itself behind a veil of false identifications. Effective spiritual practice peels away our attachment to these identities. And so, of course, the first thing I wonder is, how do you know if your spiritual practice is effective, and what is an effective spiritual practice? Because there's so much out there. How do you know if it's effective? What is effective spiritual practice?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I think we all know our condition, even if we're not really aware of our condition. I mean, we know how our mind treats us or acts or responds. We know our emotional states, how we react to things and people, situations. So those are kind of, effective spiritual practice makes all those things better. Makes, it makes life better. If your life isn't getting better, then you need to re-examine it. But better doesn't mean feeling good. There's a great teaching in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna is saying is recommending that of the two things people pursue in life, one of them is pleasurable and the other is the beneficial. He says it's always better to pursue the beneficial, because at the end of that you get pleasure. If you're only seeking pleasure, then what's really beneficial isn't likely to arise so easily. But anyway, you become a better person, and hopefully you become a more humble, better person. But and the other thing is, the important, to me, my point of view, the important thing is insights. Seeing into the nature of things, seeing into the nature of how you operate, how your mind works, the nature of your relationships with people, what they are, there's so many things. Looking at nature and the wonder of how everything fits and how everything works in perfect harmony with everything else. It's the whole thing is one. The whole thing with the capital T is one big organism, with lots of moving parts. And so those kind of insights, give there's a joy in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for
Definitely.
me at least, we mentioned this last time we talked. There was a dawning of an enlarging of the story. What my whole life, sort of the frame had been. Suddenly, I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's more to talk about here," and that the sort of being knocked out of the limited frame that we basically live in our entire lives. You get sort of rattled out of it, and from where I sit, it's just like everything got way more interesting, if only from the start, from an intellectual perspective. It's like the story was way cooler than I thought it was.
For sure.
All right, I got a quote I want to read you from the book you gave me, The Book of Strangers. I just want to see your response to it. It's one of my favorite lines from the book. It goes like this. If madness was the conviction that there was some total conspiracy to imprison and destroy us, perhaps the wisdom of the sages was that, in fact, this was but the dark shadow of a luminous truth, that the world was a divine conspiracy to liberate us and recreate us. Does that make sense? Makes sense to me. I think that's kind of one of the things I sort of got a glimpse of.
I'm kind of like you in the sense that I need to see something written in front of me to fully grasp it.
I'm the same way.
All right. So
but wait, but your conviction tells me everything I need to know.
right. It's like there's a Joey sort of introduced me to the as above, so below thing. And we have this ongoing discussion about how sometimes down here we get it all wrong. We almost get it right, but we get it wrong because we're sort of seeing it in a mirror backwards.
We're just seeing it in the manifestation, in the physical, without seeing like the big picture. It's like we take the big idea and we try and cramp it down into one little fraction of what it is. And so it gets a little convoluted.
Or constrained.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell us about PRASAD. You were involved in that for a while. And it's not the normal thing we talk about, but we are donors to PRASAD.
Well, thank you for that. And PRASAD came out of the work we did in India. And when I say we, my teacher, Swami Muktananda, in the area around where his ashram is in Maharashtra state, India, in a rural valley, the Tansa Valley, as his ashram grew, he continued to help out the local people. And in the late 70s, because the villages there, it was probably close to 60% tribal, what they call Adivasi, which is similar translation to Aboriginal. They're really the indigenous people of the region. And so a lot of those villages there didn't have much and didn't have medical care. So the first thing that Baba did, which is what we call Swami Muktananda, affectionate term for him, is he had built a mobile hospital. And so that hospital went around to the local villages every day, parked in a certain area where a number of villages had access to it. And there was a doctor and a little dispensary in the back. And so people were able to get medical help. And so he did many other things in the area also to help the local tribals. But at any rate, and continued to do programs for them. And then when Baba passed in 1982, his successor, Guru Mai, I sort of transferred my studentship to her and remained in India. And I was managing the ashram there. And one day she said, "Why don't you go out and find somebody to sit in your seat to manage the ashram, and go out and meet our neighbors," like that. So there was two young boys. One was a Muslim named Iqbal, and the other was a young Hindu by the name of Jagan, and they were two sort of unlikely friends in that, there are tensions between most Muslim and Hindu communities in India, as one might imagine. And then Iqbal was the only Muslim family in the area. And so, but Jagan and he were best friends. And this was in the early 1980s, early to mid 80, like 80, 85, 86. And whenever there was some local problem, somebody got bit by a snake, somebody was getting married, they didn't have proper utensils to have a wedding for their daughter, the ashram would always supply them with what they needed. We would provide whatever help it was to take somebody to the hospital. We always did whatever we could And these were the two boys that were normally the liaisons. They were the ones that were really the local social workers for the local villages. But this is an all rural area. And so I called the two of them in. So because as a manager, they would always come to me and say, hey, this family needs this. So I would negotiate, they'd make that happen, And so I called them in and I said, look, I want us to go out and meet our neighbors. So we drew a map like 10 kilometers around and said, let's pick out the key villages here. And then who's the person I should see there. Started with one person. So I started going out. I would go out in the morning with one or both of them to introduce me and translate for me. And then I would come back at the end of the morning, and Gurmai would usually be sitting out, and I'd wait till the end of the people greeting her, and I'd go up and I'd sit with her, and she would ask me who I met, and she'd ask me like questions like, how many children live in the village, So I said, I'll find out. So I'd come back the next day and I'd say, these are kind of, and where do they go to school, So we built schools. And PRASAD sort of developed and grew like that. I mean, it started with Baba's work, but we really incorporated as PRASAD in the early 90s. But all this work was going on before we made it an actual entity. And now it's really thriving. There's so many programs it does, including, an award-winning tuberculosis program with the highest rate of recovery. And the reason that it's so successful is most institutions, and I think this is true for the developing world, they're not so up and up the medical, especially in rural areas. Of course you get good people, but you find a lot of people aren't getting the kind of service that they really need. So what we do in PRASAD is if we're giving a regimen of medication, we actually go out to the village and make sure that the people get to take them. So we do a lot of follow-up stuff and so many programs that we do there. And there's a hospital in India, and eye care has been a specialty. And as you mentioned, we did massive eye camps with, I think it was the first time intraocular lenses were actually implanted in cataract surgeries. And then we do a dental health program. We have a mobile dental van in Sullivan County, New York. And and I invite people to go to PRASAD. You can always use donations, and the work. You can check us out. The credibility factors in terms of, your donations aren't getting spent on admin. Yep. Small amount of them.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Baba Muktananda story, or can you tell us about when you met him? That you can share.
I'll probably tear up too much.
We love it. We love it when that happens.
I love it when Duff cries.
I'm going to have to pick a not so favorite. A lot of years away from him, and most of that was building an ashram in California. But I also got involved in as well. So what was an ashram life became ashram business and other kind of spiritual activities that we'll talk about another time, perhaps. But I always felt guilty that I didn't spend enough time with Baba. And so when I went back in 1982, I went in I got there in April of '82, and there was a big project. I was there for about a month into May, through Baba's birthday, and then there was a big project taking place in the Oakland ashram, a major construction project, and the crew was all going there to do a big renovation, and the person heading up that project asked me if because we were very close friends, asked me if I would see if Baba would let me go and manage the ashram there so that the work would go more smoothly. And so I was a little reluctant, but I said, okay. So this was actually this was in July that he asked me to go. It was July 4th, because there was a celebration for 4th of July, and so I went up to Baba in the darshan line, the line that goes up to greet him, and I asked him. I said, it was recommended that I manage the Oakland ashram while while the project goes on, so that the work will go better, smoother. And Baba just very stern said, "Why do you want to leave me?" He said, "You haven't," and he didn't say it like, "Why do you?" It's like, "Why do you want to leave?" He said, "You haven't spent enough time with me." And then he said, and I'm kneeling down in front of him, and he said, he kind of thinks for a second. He said, stay for 2 months, and then go. You could always tell when Baba was finished or not finished speaking to you. When he was finished, he always gave you a head gesture, a hand gesture, sometimes it was a grunt, but there was always some indication that your time was finished. And he didn't give me that after he said 2 months. And he kind of looked up like he was thinking or looking at something. And then he turned to me, he said, "Stay 3 months, and then what do you want to do?" And I felt like, I fucked up, and so October 2nd came around, and Baba left for good. He passed on, and something I don't say in public, but I was called to his room that night.
You're gonna make us all cry.
You got this. You got this.
So I got my 3 months in.
Oh, thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, we broke them. Listeners,
Good job, guys.
there is lots more of this. Ron has a website, ronbrent.com, where he's got a lot of stories about those early days we talked about, a blog, some other stuff. You can just keep up with him. I recommend checking that out. Also, if you were intrigued by PRASAD, it's PRASAD.org, prasad.org. Check it out. They're doing great work all around the world. And Ron, you're our new favorite friend.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you, guys.
All right. Cheers, man.
Look forward to seeing you next
time. We'll do
time.
part two.
We'll do part two. Part two.
Cool.
We're only up to like 1980 or something. Yeah. We got a lot more ground to cover. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, that's someone means what they're saying when that happens.
So sweet.
So Baba Muktananda is a great spiritual teacher for those who weren't familiar with his name. Ron's great. He lives on the same street that Marguerite took her first horse riding lessons on, and we drive by there all the time. We were talking the last time we saw each other. We're in a competition now for who can see the most bears this summer.
You're at what, 5 now?
I'm at 5, but he said that after we spoke, he drove home that night and his trash was knocked over. So we're neck and neck.
We might need to have him back and just have a meditation, like a sort of a meditation episode, and do all things meditating, because he's a meditation teacher, was for years and years. And I'm sure he'd have some insight for those looking to add a little meditation to their life.
Shame on us for not getting into that.
Next time, that's part 2.
That's part 2. Yeah, we love Ron. Ron, you'll be back soon. Okay, I've got one for you. And this is Matt McButter would be very proud right now. If he's listening, I know he will be. This is about as good as it gets. So I was reading the Vedanta, Swami Vivekananda, and he was talking about how the light of the soul is self-luminous, meaning it shines of its own accord. It is not illuminated by something else. But that's not the point here. So I'm going to read this little passage and then I want to point something out. He says, that which is self-luminous cannot decay. The luminosity of that which shines through a borrowed light comes and goes, but that which is light itself, what can make that come and go, flourish and decay? For example, here's a borrowed light. We see that the moon waxes and wanes because it shines through the borrowed light of the sun. If a lump of hot iron is put into the fire and made red hot, it glows, but its light will vanish because it is borrowed. So, decadence is possible only of that light which is borrowed and not of its own essence. So I read that passage. The first sentence says, that which is self-luminous cannot decay. And the last sentence says, so decadence is possible, blah, blah, blah. Decadence and decay I never knew that decadence meant decay.
I had no idea. I thought it was indulgence, right?
Right.
I didn't think.
But I guess
light.
But I guess think about it. It's like if you are in an indulgent state, you're probably heading down the road to decay, right? Like anything that turns, right? As
you're borrowing, right? You're borrowing the joy or the light from something else. It's not yours to keep.
As Ron Brent would tell you, that's the difference between the pleasurable and the beneficial. If you're chasing the pleasurable, you're heading down the road towards decadence, people. Be careful. Okay. So we're on a bit of a Swami Vivekananda binge around these parts. I got a really interesting thing to end the show. We talked about spiritual awakenings there. And one of the things about them is that the ego, in its limitation, in its sort of function of limitation, we've all heard a discussion, like as you go through life, you build your filters and you put your blinders on, and if you don't try to stay open-minded, you will eventually only see what you want to see, right? That's what they talk about with the echo chambers and all that stuff. So a life lived in ego is essentially a process of tightening. And a spiritual awakening, one way to think about it is it's the moment when the tightening ceases and an unwinding starts, and the all the things that you thought were important become less important, and they start to fall away, and you start to resolve yourself. And so here's this passage that he was saying here, and it has to do, we live in our senses, right? So it's when you can turn within, the grip that sensory objects have on you starts to recede. And he says, there is one set of ideas in our mind which is always struggling to get outside through the channels of the senses. And behind that, although it may be thin and weak, there is an infinitely small voice which says, do not go outside. The two beautiful Sanskrit words for these phenomena are pravriti and nivriti, circling forward and circling inward. It is the circling forward which usually governs our actions. But religion begins with this circling inward. Spirituality begins with this circling inward. So essentially, the turning within, nivriti, circling inward, is the resolution of self, or the beginning of the resolution of self. So pravriti and nivriti, you want to be guided by the latter. And I mean, if you're a yogi.
You want to go inside.
If you want to go inside, there's your route, folks. Circle inward, not outward. Thank you for listening. We'll be back with you in a week.
Thank you. Bye-bye. You've been listening to How to Tickle Yourself with your host, Duff McDonald, and me, Joey of Rockledge. You can help us by liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast with others. You can talk to us and see what else is happening on Instagram and Facebook at How to Tickle Yourself. This program was recorded in Studio B of the historic Rockledge Recording Studio. Right Here, Right Now, our original 16-part theme music, was written and recorded by the legendary Paul Reddick and Kyle Ferguson of the Sidemen, with Steve Mariner on bass and drums and in the mixing room. This podcast is produced and distributed by Storic Media. Our editor is Oscar Desiderio. Our producers are Kristen Verbitsky and Chuck Labella. For more information, visit storicmedia.com. That's STORIC media.com.